Good evening, guys, and welcome to my hurricane forecast. In this hurricane forecast, I'm going to be talking about tropical disturbance 1. Now, before I begin this video, I'd like for you guys to like, subscribe, and turn on all post notifications as it helps a lot. Now, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to be talking about tropical disturbance 1. Tropical disturbance 1 currently has an 80% chance of formation within the next 5 days and a medium 60% chance of development within the next 48 hours, which means that we might potentially see a tropical depression or maybe even a tropical storm form within that time period. So this has the chance of becoming a tropical depression or maybe a tropical storm. With a tropical storm, we're going to see wind speeds maybe up to 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, because the chances are raising for this to develop into a tropical depression or a tropical storm. And also thereafter, after it affects the Yucatan Peninsula and it emerges out into the Gulf of Mexico, then we see a threat to the US. This might potentially affect Texas or Louisiana, but the track is not really clear as of now because of the uncertainty in its forecast. But still, this is projected to at least make a landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula and then move up into the Gulf of Mexico and may be a threat for Texas or Louisiana. Now, the reason why this might be a threat for Texas and Louisiana is because the area that it's headed in, the first thing that's going to allow the intensification of this is the more warmer water temperatures that it's going to be headed in, especially if it heads towards Louisiana, because the water temperatures are unthinkably warm in that area. Regardless if it heads towards Texas or Louisiana, it's likely going to intensify, as the majority of the models show. And honestly, I don't give the models a wrong for showing it intensifying into potentially a Category 3 hurricane, because the first reason is that there's going to be absence in wind shear, a little bit of wind shear, and maybe even no dry air. And with that and warm water temperatures, this is just going to allow this tropical disturbance to develop. Therefore, when it enters the Gulf of Mexico, then we're likely going to see this strengthen and intensify, potentially into a major hurricane or maybe a high-end Category 1 or 2 hurricane. So we still can't count out the impacts. The impacts may be very heavy rains and strong winds. Now the storm surge is going to be high with this because of the concave, the area that it's going to be headed in. Because if it heads towards Texas, you notice it shapes like a little cup along Texas. And that's going to allow this to push in all of that water from out of the Gulf of Mexico with its onshore winds, and that's going to cause the storm surge. So if this head towards Louisiana, then we're likely going to see this intensify further, because the first things first is because water temperatures around Louisiana are warmer than they are in Texas, around off coast of Texas. So water temperatures around Louisiana are touching somewhere between 31 and 32 degrees Celsius. And also the water temperatures around Texas are touching 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. Now, there's not much of a big difference in the warm water temperatures, but regardless, the water temperatures in the entire Gulf of Mexico and into the Caribbean are warm enough to support tropical development. And just be minded that this is the season we usually see major hurricanes form. So if this emerges out into the Bay of Campeche and it goes out into the Gulf of Mexico, then we're likely going to see a threat towards Texas or the Louisiana coastline. And that means New Orleans and Houston might be in its path if anything changes. So if you live in Texas and Louisiana, please pay close attention to this, because this could potentially affect your area. In terms of impacts, I already mentioned that, but you can't count out the impacts that this is going to bring. It's going to be devastating if it becomes a Category 3 or a Category 1 or 2. Category 1 hurricanes will do damages. Category 2 hurricanes, regardless of its strength, they do have their own mind and they do not. Please, this is one tip. If a major hurricane or a hurricane passed through your area, do not look at the past, because I see some people tend to mention this. The last hurricane that we saw was not bad, and they projected it to be extremely bad. Well, these storms have a mind of their own. And sometimes it's hard to predict how strong they will be and also their path. Hence why they mention that the intensity and the track is sort of uncertain because of how this tropical disturbance is moving, and because it has not already become a tropical depression or a tropical storm. So there's still uncertainty in its forecast, but the models are starting to agree that we might see a landfall on Texas or Louisiana. But before that, it's probably going to affect Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula. So before then it might become a tropical storm or a tropical depression, remain a tropical depression. Then the intensity when it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it all determines on how much land interaction it has. Because if it has lots of land interaction with the Yucatan Peninsula, then we're likely going to see a weaker storm emerge out into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, speaking in terms of it having a little less impacts on the Yucatan Peninsula, then we're going to see a stronger storm emerge out in the Gulf of Mexico. So now I'm going to show you guys the water temperatures that this is going to be headed in as it moves up into the Gulf of Mexico. So the water temperatures that this could potentially be headed in, especially when it emerges out into the Gulf of Mexico, is unthinkably high. Water temperatures in the entire Gulf of Mexico are somewhere between 29 and 32 degrees Celsius. Now, the area that this could potentially head in, if you notice, the water temperatures are 31 to 32 degrees Celsius. So it would not surprise me at all for us to see a storm emerge out into the Gulf of Mexico and quickly intensifies, because we saw the same thing with Laura last year, and remember, Laura made landfall in this exact area, and in that exact area the water temperatures are warm. When I mention this, it really concerns me because of how this track is taking. Because when this starts moving on its northern track and heads towards that area, or maybe towards that area, the water temperatures that this could potentially be headed in are high on another level. The water temperatures in that area are 31 degrees Celsius plus. So, as I mentioned previously, it would not surprise me to see this intensify. The wind shear, the dry air, the water temperatures. The dry air is just going to be a little bit, or maybe even none. Same thing with the wind shear, maybe even no wind shear. And we know with no wind shear, no dry air, and warm water temperatures and a moist atmosphere, we're going to see the storm intensify. So please pay attention to this storm if you live in Louisiana or Texas, because this is potentially going to be headed towards your area. Now, as I mentioned, the track seems kind of uncertain right now, but the models are kind of starting to get in agreement that this might potentially make landfall on Texas or Louisiana. Now, talking about a direct threat, the threat is probably going to be heavy rainfall, because some of the models show it stalling when it enters that area. And when it enters this exact area, one of the models showed it stalling for a couple of, days, about 24 hours then. It stalls in that area and just rapidly intensifies. And if a storm stalls in that area, the intensification that's going to occur within 12 to 24 hours is probably going to be nothing nice. We don't know the outcome of this storm. And that's the thing that's, holding us back from, predicting how this storm might affect. Now, this is not an official track, but if I were to get into the situation of making a track for this storm, it would probably be this track. Don't ask why the cone is that big. It's because it could possibly be headed in that area or maybe in that area. That's why the cone extends so wide. So, as I mentioned, the track in intensity and also in its original area that it is potentially going to be headed in is uncertain right now. So what I'm going to do is head over towards spaghetti plots. Then I'm going to show you guys forecast models. Then I'm going to show you guys the intensity guidance. So first thing we're going to look at is going to be the intensity guidance. So the latest intensity guidance on Invest 99L. You notice the majority of the models show it intensifying between 60 to 84 hours out. Now, if you notice the drastic decrease in its intensity, it's going to be land interaction. And the land interaction is probably going to be 96 hours out. And by then, it might potentially be in the Gulf of Mexico about to make landfall on Texas or Louisiana. So, the models show quickly intensifying weekends and then quickly, getting down back to that tropical storm and tropical depression status. But as I said, the potential for this becoming a major hurricane is sort of high, although only 2 models show it become a major hurricane. But as of now, the majority of the model keep it at potentially high-end Category 1 hurricane or Category 2 hurricane or Category 3 hurricane. So it's just a waiting game on what's going to happen in the future. So now I'm going to show you guys the spaghetti plots on it. So I decided to change things up a little bit, but I'm going to show you guys how strong this is going to be potentially at landfall. Now, pressure down to 949 millibar, which is not surprising at this point, because this is a huge storm, a huge, extremely huge storm. And remember when I said that the water temperature is just off coast of Louisiana is high? Well, believe me or not, the area that this, if it heads in this area, the area that it's going to head in, especially off coast of Louisiana, the water temperatures are boiling. So it would not surprise me to see this intensify just before landfall. So now we're going to go a little bit farther out to see what happens. Now, this starts to intensify even stronger. Pressure gets down to 936 millibar. Maybe a Cat 4 at this point, Cat 5 maybe. And well-defined center of circulation. You could see that little eye, the clearing in the middle. You could see the vortex in this. You could see the lots of thunderstorms associated. Here's the little eye wall. Here's the eye wall. And this may be Lake Charles, because Lake Charles saw a landfall from Laura, which was also a major hurricane last year. So I'm not trying to get you guys to panic, but please pay attention to this if you live on the Texas and Louisiana coastline, because this is potentially going to be a strong storm. So as I mentioned, everything is coming together for this to develop, and the conditions are just right. So do not be surprised if this quickly intensifies, because when it enters the Gulf of Mexico, because of its warm water temperatures and the absence of wind shear and dry air. So please pay attention to the forecast if you live in Texas, Louisiana, also Yucatan Peninsula, because this is maybe going to be headed towards your area. So thank you guys for watching. I'm going to keep you guys posted on this storm, and tomorrow I promise I'll upload a video. If I don't, I'll smack myself. So thank you for watching.